Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the PFN Miami Dolphins podcast. I am your co-host, All Freaky, here with Adam Beasley today to discuss all the things that have been going on in pre-free agency and the tampering window and all that good stuff. So good morning, Adam. How are you?
A little sleep deprived.
Yeah, I feel you.
It's been an interesting week. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. I don't know how many of the things that have transpired in the last few days have been totally unexpected.
Mhm.
Certainly, some of the players they added weren't on our radar, but Christian Wilkins, we knew he was going to get paid. Robert Hunt, we knew he was going to get paid. Andrew Van Ginkel, we had an idea that there would be a market for him. I don't think anyone saw that market. And then
Mhm.
further on down, the Brandon Joneses of the world and Raekwon Davis is like those contracts were just bonkers. I mean, they were huge numbers. So it looks like between that and the cuts the Dolphins made last week, which we discussed then, it looks like there's been this massive purge of talent, and I guess there has been, but it's a season of transition for this
Mhm.
franchise, and I'm really fascinated to see where things go.
Me too. I think it's hard for the fans right now to swallow losing, especially Wilkins and Andrew Van Ginkel, are two things that are, hard for the fans right now because they were our fan favorites, but also we have to understand that this is a business and that there was no way that we were able to pay all these guys, what the other teams were willing to pay them. And so unfortunately, I think that's what hurts the most for us right now is that we wanted to keep them and we couldn't. So we move on.
Yeah, let's go through some of these contracts because you talked about being unable. I don't think they were even in the same stratosphere, Allie,
Mhm.
with what has been offered. Well, what will be signed. We're taping this at 10 a.m. today, just full disclosure. So free agency begins in earnest at 4 p.m. That's when trades can be official. That's when free agents from other teams can sign with your team. And the Dolphins have names that we'll see pop up as official transactions today, but we'll also see a lot walk out the door. And let's just go through these deals. I mean, they're just eye popping. Again, the context we need is the salary cap ballooned. I mean, it was up 13% this
Mhm.
year, $255.5 million. I mean, it is a staggering amount of money that was out there. I think like $1 billion in disposable income. That's what the 32 teams had collectively. You're going to see some contracts like we did. Christian Wilkins, we knew was going to be the big prize, not just the Dolphins, but after Kirk Cousins, he may have been the biggest free agent out there who
Mhm.
wasn't tagged. He was paid like it. I mean, holy mackerel! Antonio Pierce is going for it early on. 4 years, $110 million is the deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. That $27.5 million AAV, Allie, is not just the third highest of a defensive tackle, but the fifth highest of any defensive player in the National Football League. And
Unreal.
and yeah, it is unreal. And Wilkins certainly was a huge part of what the Dolphins have done. 9 sacks this past year, a ton of quarterback hits. Um, he really came into his own under the system Vic Fangio built for him. But $27.5 million is not far off from what the Buccaneers are giving Baker Mayfield. Right.
Mhm.
I mean,
Right.
so you're basically paying a defensive tackle who doesn't touch the ball, who might have, 4, 5, 6 turnovers max in the course of a season. That's the number of times he's going to touch the football. He'll have some sacks, he'll have a bunch of quarterback hits, all that. But you're paying him like a middle class quarterback, which again, God bless the Raiders. They had the financing to do it. That's a really big sum. Okay. Robert Hunt with the Carolina Panthers, another team with cap space, another team that he like. Let's be frank, both Wilkins and Hunt cashed in and
Oh,
they
yeah.
traded the chance of success in 2024. We don't know how those teams are going to be down the road, but they traded in the chance of success in 2024 for life-changing money. And I think all of us would probably make that same choice because
Absolutely.
that was their
Yeah.
big year for their contract, right? So
Mhm.
Hunt from the Panthers is getting $100 million over 5 years, $20 million a year, which is like, high end tackle money. It was at least a couple of years ago, high end wide receiver money. And he's getting paid as a guard. And, I'm not saying Robert Hunt is an excellent player. He's a very good player. But the money, the things the Dolphins can do by not paying him, you kind of saw. I mean, they've been up against the cap. It's a storyline that we talked about all winter. They didn't have the ability to compete at the highest end of free agency. Um, and so they let those big contracts walk out the door. And what they did is they used that money to sign Aaron Brewer, who's probably going to be Connor Williams' replacement at center. Maybe he plays guard, but really, really athletic guy out of Tennessee. Jordan Brooks, who was probably, if not the best, the second or third best off-ball linebacker in all of free agency. They got him pretty affordable, $8.5 a year is his contract AAV. It's pretty much a one-for-one trade. Andrew Van Ginkel out the door. He's going to reunite with Brian Flores up in Minnesota. He is gone. Shaq Barrett is in. Van Ginkel is younger. He might be a little bit better, but Barrett's going to be kind of that glue guy that keeps the front seven together until Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips get back from injury. So you can kind of see what the thinking was. And the thinking was this: is like, we know that we're going to get worse at a couple of positions. They are worse at defensive tackle. They are worse at guard today than they were a week ago. But this team had so many needs that they're okay with a downgrade at those two positions because it allows them to get better in a lot of different ways. We talked about
Mhm.
Jonnu Smith, who signed a team-friendly deal, 2 years, I think $8 million and change. All those things were only possible because they didn't compete at the highest end for those two really, really good players.
Absolutely, yeah. So I agree. I think, getting rid of some of those huge contracts allowed us to bring more players in that can, even though they're veterans, they have that experience, yet still they can, learn to thrive in our system. So it's exciting to see that. And I think a lot of us were like on death's doorstep on Monday, after all everybody got dumped. But I think a lot of us feel a lot better now seeing, that we were able to bring on these guys for fairly inexpensive contracts, whether, even though they're short-term contracts, still, they help fulfill the need at this time.
Yeah, and again, I think if a Monday was just in a vacuum, that if you lost those two players, and keep in mind they're going to get compensatory draft picks for them. Chris Greer is not going to jeopardize. I think they're in line to get 2 third-round picks, one's for each
Hmm.
for both Wilkins and Hunt in 2025. Maybe they get something for Raekwon Davis. We'll see. But they're going to have a really good haul of draft picks so long as they don't screw it up in 2025. If that was the entirety of the purge, so to speak, I think most fans would be okay with it. They see the
Hmm.
money that's been freed up, but it's not just that. And there's a context you have to consider. They've also cut Manu Agba, Xavier Howard, Jerome Baker, Deshaun Elliott is on an expiring contract. Eli Apple. I know a lot of fans like to dunk on Eli, but that secondary was only held together because of him giving them competent play throughout
Hmm.
pretty key moments of last season. Those guys are also probably out the door. So you look at the totality of what they're losing. I mean, they only have two wide receivers right now they can count on. They're really good in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but Braxton Berrios is a free agent, and River Craycraft going to be back, and a lot of these guys that were helpful to them this past season uh, might be gone. So I think you look at the totality of what
Correct.
they've done, and you've got to be a little bit nervous, right? You've got to be a little bit concerned as to, do they have the playmakers that they need? I wrote about this today, Wednesday, on Pro Football Network, about how like, they've done a solid job of getting competent players at key positions that they needed. Look, Jordan Brooks is a very, very competent player. He is going to help them big time, I think, particularly with the loss of Jerome Baker. Uh, Jordan Poyer and Shaq Barrett, two of the most accomplished defensive players that you're going to be that are available this cycle. Unfortunately, they're both old, and Barrett's got injury history, right? And so we're wondering where the big play is going to come from. And here's some
Hmm.
stats, Allie, that I think will make just blow your mind. So assuming Agba, Howard, Baker, Elliott, and Apple are all gone, they're losing. The Dolphins are losing 9 interceptions from 2023. 9 interceptions, 47 passes defense, 3 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries, 23 sacks, 29 tackles for loss, and a staggering 64 quarterback hits. Now, a lot of those sacks and quarterback hits were responsible. One person responsible for those, and that was Christian Wilkins, right? I mean, he was
Hmm.
such an impactful player. But I think on aggregate, like their pass defense is worse too. So the players they've gotten back: Brooks, Barrett, Poyer, and Walker. 2 interceptions, 14 passes defense, 6 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, 10 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, and 18 quarterback hits. So you're talking about an exodus of 46 quarterback hits. That's two a game. It's more than two a game of your pass rush that's just vanished.
Hmm.
how do you replace that? Like, particularly when you don't A, have the cap money to do it, and B, don't seem particularly willing and eager to jump into that market because you want to preserve your compensatory picks. I think we talked about this last week. Um, if the Dolphins trade for a player, or if they sign what's known as a street free agent, which was a player that's been cut, like Xavier Howard is a street free agent. He
Mhm.
is able to sign to any team anytime. He didn't have to wait till 4 o'clock Wednesday because he was cut. He was no longer in a contract by the Dolphins. Those players don't count against the compensatory pick formula. Unfortunately, they're usually the players with some warts, right? And so, if you're going to make your entire living in free agency signing street free agents, you can put together a team that has no holes, but the top end just really isn't there. I mean, that's the concern. So, maybe the Dolphins go out and try to go get a Chase Young or a Kendall Fuller or a DJ Reader or a Steph Gilmore. Maybe they swing a trade for L'Jarius Sneed. All of these things would cut into their draft capital that I don't think Chris Greer particularly wants to do. And so I think, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough unless they absolutely hit a home run in the draft. Maybe their philosophy is this: we've got, two pretty decent draft picks. I think 21 and 55, something in that range, whatever their second round pick is. They don't
Mhm.
have a third or a fourth. And they say, okay, we love three pass rushers in the draft. We're going to go and target one free agency, or we or in the first round, not in free
Mhm.
agency, in the first round of the draft. Or we love three or four corners, and we are be all right. Wait until round two to address the offensive line, which I think they need to do as well. I get it, but it's not a great world to live in, Allie, to go into a draft knowing you have to take a position,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
The best teams, what they do is they draft the best available player, and
Mhm.
they continually get high end talent. And if it's another wide receiver, so be it. We don't have a glaring need at guard. Now we have the three best wide receivers in the world playing for our team. Like
Mhm.
that's how the really good teams go from good to great. I don't know if the Dolphins can live in that world this year.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough when you have to depend on the draft, but luckily, I don't really feel like we, totally have to. I feel like we're in a good spot now. Are there any, particular free agents that you see that the Dolphins could go after, in the coming days?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I don't want to get too far uh, over our skis because I want people when they listen to this not to have a totally dated experience, right?
Sure.
I mean, we're the half an hour we're going to take to tape this. There'll probably be 5 or 6 transactions that pop up, not Dolphins related, but just league wide that impact the entire league. So I don't want to give too many names, but just a couple to keep in mind, I would say. Um, maybe they kick the tires in Odell. Like, I mean, certainly he's not the player he was 5, 6 years ago, but he showed last year that, he's still kind of got something. And you put him, if you ask him to be your number 3 wide receiver on an offense now, by the way, that also has Jonnu Smith,
Mhm.
that has Devon Achan another year in the system. We'll see Raheem Mostert, what he looks like at age. I think he's 32 or 33 this year. Maybe they add another running back. But you get all those guys together. Tua, 14 minutes into this podcast, the first time I've mentioned the quarterback, Tua taking another step forward. Maybe Beckham says, hey, I love Miami. I love this area. I can come to a team where they'll pay me. And again, I think Odell might be one of those guys they wait until after May 1. Like
Mhm.
some of these free agents are going to find themselves squeezed because there will come a point where teams either A, run out of money, run out of need, or simply want to wait to see what happens to the draft. And again, we're not even 48 hours into free agency. The legal tampering period began noon on Monday, but there will be at some point it'll come into focus. There will be a bunch of players that are simply not going to sign with anybody until after the draft. And after the draft is when you can sign anybody you want and it won't impact your comp picks. And I think kind of that's what the focus will be for the Dolphins. So maybe Odell falls under that, into that bucket. There are some solid, I wouldn't say great, some solid wide receivers out there, but I think teams, if they've needed a wide receiver, yeah, they've either addressed it or they're going to get to the draft because the draft
Mhm.
is so good at that position. So maybe you see like a guy like Odell, Josh Reynolds, Curtis Samuel, Marquise Brown, Byron Pringle, some of these names that you hear out there as options at wide receiver. Maybe the Dolphins wait until after May 1 to get into that market. Um, I think we should take a second to kind of give Chris Greer his flowers on the Jonnu Smith deal. First of all, he's a local guy, went to FIU. I think he's Dave Furonis may have had this tweet over at the Sun Sentinel that he's going to be the first FIU player ever to, if not week one, or if not to ever play for the Dolphins, at least suit up for week one. So it's a cool moment for that program down here to have a Miami Dolphin. He had, I think, something 50 some odd catches last year. He's going to be a big help. You look at the deficiencies this Dolphins offense had last year, and you took away Tyreek, you took away Waddle. There wasn't a third answer, right? In the passing game. Certainly, they were able to run the ball, but in the passing game, there wasn't a third answer. Terron Smith, try hard guy, and he helps them a lot of ways. He's not a dynamic receiving tight end. And maybe Jonnu Smith isn't either, but he's certainly better than what they've had. So I think Greer deserves some credit. A guy, again, another street free agent guy that can help them right away without hurting them with comp picks. I think he was a good signing. I do think they do have obviously still some question marks on the offensive line.
Hmm.
Isaiah Wynn would be an interesting name. I would think about trying to kick the tires on. I I think we might have to let the idea of Connor Williams coming back go. The more
Hmm.
you hear about the severity of the knee injury he suffered, probably not a fit here. Maybe they get to June 1, they get that Xavier Howard money, and he's made a significant recovery. But I don't think you can rule out the possibility that Connor Williams doesn't play again, which we didn't really know in the moment, right? That was kind of information that we've gotten over the last few months. But
Okay.
so I think they need to count on at least one, if probably two more starting offensive linemen. Maybe they find it in the draft. Maybe Isaiah Wynn comes back. That would be a good fit. So there are names out there. I don't think I don't think we should expect a big splash. Maybe Odell's a big splash, but he's still not going to cost you a ton of money.
Hmm.
I think on offense, really largely what you see is what you're going to get.
So, where do we stand right now as far as Terron Armstead? Because I'm not sure if I was up to date on his latest info.
Yeah. So widely reported that he is returning on an adjusted contract. Now
Okay.
it's curious whether that adjusted contract is a pay cut or just a restructure that moves the money around but doesn't take any away. Um, I would hope if I was the Dolphins that you could ask for a little bit of that money back. I think he's due close to $14 million in base salary this year, which for a starting tackle, that's not crazy money, but it's a little bit reckless money when the guy, he's missed 11 games the last 2 years. We love him. He was our good guy award winner, and he's certainly, when he's on the field, he's a big difference maker for this team. But are you going to pay $14 million for a guy who might not play much more than half the season? And I think that for the Dolphins is something they're figuring out. Um, I fully do expect him back on the field. He and Austin Jackson will be the starting two tackles, assuming both healthy. But I do think they need to add to that position. If they can find someone in the draft, the first round, preferably, but first or second round, that can help them at tackle and at guard and compete for snaps at both spots, I think that's the right move for them.
Okay, interesting. So, staying on the topic of having some contracts that had been restructured, I know we had a big restructuring with Jalen Ramsey, I Alec Ingold. Can you shed some light on a couple of those different restructures?
Yeah, I mean, these are really just procedural issues. It's escape hatches that were created, that were built into their contract. And some of these guys, I have to go back and look, maybe most, if not all of them, are getting void years added to their deals, which, again, if you thought restructures were made your head kind of swim and eyes glaze over, I get it. But what void years basically are, or it extends the life of how much longer you can push the can down the road. Unfortunately, at some point that bill will come due. It's just a year later and a year later and a year later every time you do it. So,
Mhm.
Alec Ingold isn't owed a ton of money, right? I mean, I think I have to look it up, but $3-4 million maybe max. So you're not really hurting yourself long term by doing that. Now, if they added a void year to Tyreek's contract, then you could start to be concerned because he already de facto has a void year in his contract. He's owed $45 million. in 2026, which he is not going to see that. I mean, that is an obscene amount of money for a wide receiver. We're talking about Tua's contract
Mhm.
being somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 million. That's, he's not going to get that. So I think Tyreek might be more in line for an extension than he would be a void year added, just simply because those numbers are crazy at the end of his contract. But I think the broader point is this: is that they don't have fu money, so to speak. They don't have money that will let them do whatever they want, but they have the flexibility. If there is a player that they really want to go and get, they can do it because of all these set escape hatches they've written into the contracts.
Amazing. So, yeah, I think one of the biggest steals that a lot of people are excited about having Jordan Poyer joining us from the Bills, and that was just a 1 year. What was it, like $2 million
Mhm.
contract? You feel like that was a very smart move. I know you had mentioned it on the previous podcast that you possibly foresaw that happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm almost always wrong, but once in a while I'm right. So I'll take my victory laps when I can. Jordan Poyer will be, barring something strange happening, the starting safety alongside Javon Holland this year, which is wild because there hasn't there aside from obviously Josh Allen's the biggest Dolphins killer, but he's been up there among those that have had their way with the Miami Dolphins. I think he's 11-2 in his career against the Dolphins. Bunch of interceptions, bunch of pass breakups. The question with Poyer, obviously, who's by the way, who has a place down here, who's he and his wife love it down here. This is something
Yes.
that they wanted to do before this year, and they're glad they got it done this year. Um, what does he have left in the tank? Right, dude's 32 years old. Lot of miles on that odometer, and we'll have to see what he's got. I think he can help them this year. There's a reason it's a 1 year deal, but I think he can help them this year. They'll probably still add some youth at that position. Maybe in the draft, day three, they'll get a safety, something like that. Wouldn't
Hmm.
surprise me at all.
Okay.
But they're for the Dolphins, and I think we're going to talk more broadly about if they've regressed or not, or they've gotten better. But before we get to that, I think the Dolphins are making some gambles this year, and that's the reality of life when you're up against the cap and you have to save money to pay your quarterback, maybe to pay Jalen Waddle, to pay Jalen Phillips. You've got to take some risks in free agency, particularly when you don't have a ton of draft picks. And they've got a couple of those risks on their ledger. They're not high money risks. I think he and Shaq Barrett and Poyer and Shaq Barrett combined are going to make $11 million this year, maybe max. Um, that's an acceptable risk. But what happens if those guys father time just beats their butt, right? Or
Yeah.
the injury risk that we've seen in the past from Barrett comes back again. There are things that we just you know I think as outside observers should be wary about. But again, that's the bed they made when they just traded away all their draft picks to get Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb and to give those guys and Jalen Ramsey a bunch of money. That's the trade off. That's what you have to do in this league to make things work. And the best teams have quality depth up and down their roster and are able to withstand if your 32-year-old safety gets hurt. Well, we have a young guy we've been developing behind them. I don't know if the Dolphins have that at this point. And so to me, that's, beyond the fact that they bled all those playmakers on defense. Just there's a lot of things that would have to go right for the Dolphins to win big this year, and it could, absolutely could. But I think they have a lot of variance this year that they didn't last.
Okay, so I mean, as you kind of alluded to in your article earlier, you feel that the defense we have compared to what we had last year, as it stands right now, is much more subpar than what we were working with before.
Yeah, I mean, subpar might be a little harsh. I think there are a lot more questions, and you're gonna need players that have not stepped up in that way to step up in that way. Like you're gonna have to get contributions out of Cam Smith this year, right? Like he's gonna have to be a playmaker because you're not. Maybe they go sign a
Mhm.
Tre'Davious White. Maybe they. I think it's unlikely swing a trade for L'Jarius Sneed that you're giving up more draft assets that way and a lot more cap space. So I think that's less likely. I
Okay.
think it's more likely they get someone like, a White who's proven that he can play, but has obviously he's got huge injury concerns. I think that's kind of what they'll need. But yeah, they're going to need guys like Cam Smith to step up. They're going to need maybe Cameron Good in the meantime while you're still waiting on these young guys. I know they signed not young guys, the veteran guys that are coming back from injury. I know they signed a bunch of defensive tackles who, quite frankly, I'd never heard of before. Maybe one of those guys splashes, but they're in a bind that certainly there are ways that they're going to continue to get better through free agency, but they're filling holes in a lot of important places with again what I said with not lotto tickets, the wrong way to put it, but with risks. And so I think that to me is the bigger concern, is that a lot of big names on this defense for sure. Shaq Barrett, 19 and a half sacks in 2019. Jordan Poyer, 2000, I think 21 All Pro. These guys are big names.
Mhm.
There's also a reason the Dolphins, who are broke, can afford these guys because they've got some warts.
Interesting. So, how do you foresee the offense this year? We haven't had much movement in free agency so far as the offense goes, but do you feel the offense could possibly be improved over last year's? Is that possible,
Oh,
considering how good they were?
100%, because that offense fell apart at the end of the year, right? Their last 3-4 weeks wasn't great. So yeah, no,
Injuries
I
really
think
got the best of us.
yeah, right. I think the offense can and will be better. We have to see the offensive line, how that comes together. I have way more questions on defense than I do on offense. And I think they will be. And McDaniel, we have seen like kind of the roller coaster of season with him on offense. And it's always way up here at the start of the year because he's had 8 months to think of the coolest plays in the world. Right. And then after a month or two, defenses start to figure that out. And what's
Yeah.
his counter? What's his counter? What's his next act? So, I think early on the offense is going to be perfectly fine. It's going to take time for that defense to kind of get its bleep together, so to speak. Like there are a lot of new pieces and a new system. And I think there's going to be, we saw last year, like the first month of the season, the defense was kind of suspect. They had a lot of the same issues that the Dolphins are going to go through this year, except they're going to have a less accomplished defensive coordinator calling the plays and not as good players executing them. So, again, I don't want to write the obituary anywhere near that on the Dolphin season. In fact, we can talk about how Vegas still thinks they're going to be a contender this year. I just see there's a lot of unknowns at this point, and that's kind of what you expect on the first day of free agency.
Sure, this is such an exciting time, such a obviously lots and lots of questions and constant flow of news coming through. My phone has been nonstop going off, trying to keep abreast of all these different things is hard. I can't imagine what it's like for you when you're really like delving into it and writing on it and all those things. And for me as a fan, trying to digest a lot of that is very involved. But if we can help people at all, if you guys want to go to profootballnetwork.com, you can keep tallies on everything that's going on. This constant flow of news is only going to continue. So yeah, just like, let's just hope for the best for our Finns this year.
Quick thing on the way out the door, Allie. DraftKings still has the Dolphins as 19-1 to win the Super Bowl. That's top 10. They're behind the Niners, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, the Lions, the Bengals, the Eagles, Cowboys, and Packers. So they still see the Dolphins as a playoff team. They're plus 185 to win the AFC each week, which is basically 2-1, not getting too far into the gambling weeds. They're only behind the Bills. They're ahead of the Jets. The Dolphins are 10-1 to make the Super Bowl, which
we'll take it.
yeah, I mean, considering the turnover that they've had and the uncertainty they still have, if that's where the betting world sees them, I think Dolphins fans shouldn't be pulling their hair out, or if in your case, your wig out.
Yeah. I decided to go with the orange today because
Yeah, you told me you were going to wear black. I thought we were going to match.
Monday, had we recorded this on Monday, I would have been full black, like ashen face, no makeup, everything. But I got rejuvenated yesterday, so we'll see what happens from here on out.
And the good news is when we talk again next week, we'll have a much clearer idea of what this team is going to look like.
Yeah, that's exciting. I will be plastered to my phone for the next couple days.
Real quick, everybody who's listening, we appreciate it. Please subscribe. All the ways that you can subscribe podcasts are on all those platforms. Please do. And until next week, it's been good talking to you, Allie.
Yeah, you too, as always. Thanks so much.